Let's have a look at how to do a green screen. That's what we're up to in today's tutorial. So we're going to build this. So we've got a green screen with challenging areas of transparency dropped against a background. Okay, let's get into it and see how to do it. So let's start by getting the assets. So we go across to our project panel. The shortcut in After Effects is to double click in the gray area and that'll bring up the import menu. You can also go File Import if you wish. So here is how I've laid out my project. Let me go back a couple of steps. All right. So I've got a green screen section with several green screen exercises. And the one we're working on right now is Godiva green screen. I've already set it up. I've got a folder with my assets, and that has the green screen here and the background there. I've also got a folder for exports when I'm done and a folder to drop my project file. So let's go across to assets, and the first thing we'll do is we're going to bring in our green screen. Now, this one is actually stored off as a series of still files. This is called a PNG sequence, and you will sometimes get this. Some cameras or animation systems will give you an output file like this. If you have one of these, what you need to do is check this box down in the corner, PNG sequence. So when you choose PNG sequence, or sometimes you may see this called an image sequence, what that does is it actually looks at a list of files that are sequentially numbered up and then actually stitches them together as a video file, which obviously makes life much easier for you. So now that we've checked the PNG sequence button, we click open, and that will now bring in that file as a sequence, and you can see up above there it is. It sees it as it goes about 8 seconds. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is get our background. So again, we double click in the gray area. Let's go up one step, and this one is the red curtain. This one here is a single file, so we grab that as well. And okay, there's our two assets. Now, if you actually have a look at this asset here, so if you double click on it, you'll see that it's actually got an aspect ratio issue because it's actually been done on a DVC Pro camera that kind of did this semi-HD thing, but the pixels are all anamorphic and stretched. So we can kind of fix that a little bit by doing this. If you reinterpret the footage, and now to do that, you select it inside your project panel and go right click, and then you go interpret footage. Go across to main. So inside this interpret footage, we can change all sorts of things. Now here's an interesting one. Because they're individual files, you can actually set the frame rate because it doesn't have a stored frame rate with it. So if I tell it that it actually wants to be a frame rate of 25, and given I'm in Australia, that's the frame rate we like, it'll actually run it as a 25 frames per second frame rate. So that'll give us a better result. Now, the other thing we're going to do here is deal with this aspect ratio issue. So to do that, down under other options, you'll see where it says pixel aspect ratio. You can click on this. Instead of just assuming like a pixel for pixel, you can pick other aspects. The one we want now is this DVC Pro HD 720, and that's actually how it was shot. If I click on that, you'll see there in the preview panel, it immediately stretches it and interprets correctly. So there are other things you can do in these. We don't need to do them today, but sometimes when you're dealing with red footage, the color management can be quite good too. Anyway, we'll click OK. So now that we've dealt with that as the interpretation of it, let's close off this because I double clicked on it and of course it came up as a preview thing and I don't want to do that. So we're going to make a new composition. So we'll click here on the new composition button and we'll call this Godiva green screen, and I'll put my name after it. Or I'll put Godiva, it should be Godiva. Okay, now in terms of aspect, the presets kind of get you close. Like you'll see one here, you've got DVC Pro HD 720/25, and that's what the footage is. So if I click on that, it'll be close. But I've got a problem where the width, this is not actually the correct aspect. I'm still going to end up with that stretched look. So what I'm going to do is actually manually force it. So this 720p HD, I happen to know from experience that 1280 is the correct value that goes with the 720p. So these two together will work. Now, if you've got lock on, you'll find that you might have issues, so you'll have to unlock it before you load that in. Frame rate is 25. The duration of this will go 10 seconds if you set it like this. So now we click OK, and we've now got a composition. So the first thing we'll do is we're actually going to get our green screen. We'll drag that in as our top layer, and then we'll get our red curtain and drag that in below. So that's our lower layer. By the way, if you ever drag layers in and then the wrong way around, it's dead easy to switch them around just by dragging them up and down like that. Right, so now we've got it in. We still have this issue where it's not actually interpreting correctly. So we're going to use our scaling parameter to fix that. So let's hit the S key. So that means you're selecting the green screen layer at the top, hit the S key, then unlock it by clicking on that button there. Let me zoom in on that so you can see that. So I unlocked it here. Then on this horizontal axis, I'm going to drag that out. So let me zoom back a bit so you can kind of see that. As I drag this out, you'll see eventually it touches the edge of the screen, and the value for that will actually be 133. Okay, because that's the exact value that works. So you could actually just click in here and type 133, enter, which I will do right now just to prove to you. Okay. So now that she's looking normal and she's stretched to fit the whole screen, we're ready to get to work on the green screen. Now, an observation, when you are doing green screen work, before you start doing the green screen, you should always color correct the content. Now, we're starting off with an easy green screen, and this actually has the correct amount of saturation on it, or very close to the amount of saturation. You can see it's quite a vivid green. However, if your shot is like shot on a camera that's got LUTs and it's flat, or if the shot's underexposed, you should fix that first. Okay, so we'll give you another exercise like that maybe later on. But for now, just keep that in mind. So let's now have a go at building the green screen. So we're going to come over here. We're going to reset that. And inside my search section on my effects and presets, by the way, if you don't have the effects and presets, if you click on the drop-down menu, you can click on that one, but the little tick box shows me it's already there. So inside effects and presets, I'm going to type Keylight. Now the Keylight key is the best green screen key that you can get in After Effects, and it's the one that I recommend you use when you want to do green screen. So we'll drag that on. I'm not a fan of dragging onto the image because it gets very confusing. I'm a great fan of dragging on here inside the layer panel because you know exactly what you're dragging onto. So you drag the Keylight on and it immediately brings up the effects controls here. Let's twirl that closed so that's a little bit tidier. Now, here's how the Keylight works. You've got a whole bunch of controls, and I'll kind of run through them as I use them. So the first thing we need to do is to set the screen color. Now, when you look at this background key, you'll see it was a bit dark on the top, and there's areas over here that are very bright. And then in here, actually around the edge of her, it's kind of more like a mid-green. You really want to sample a color that sits in the middle of the brightness range, and particular in close to where she is. To be frank, this bit at the top doesn't really matter because we can cut it out with something called a garbage matte that we'll do later on. So I wouldn't stress about that bit. So you click on the eyedropper and then move around here to where you think of mid-green. I think somewhere around about here is kind of a nice, it's not too bright, it's not too dark. It's kind of like a good mid-green. So I click here and straight away you can see it's actually built a green screen key. I'm just going to turn off that red curtain in the background for now. I'll come back and reset that so it fills the screen later on. So it is sometimes actually easier at the initial bit to see it against black. So now as I drag through, you can see we've got a key, but I wouldn't say it's the world's best key. So let's have a look at actually improving that. Like it's over here, there's little bright bits coming in. It's not quite keying perfectly. And of course, we want to get a perfect key. Here's where you'll need to understand the view drop-down menu. Now, at the moment, we're viewing the final result, which basically means the key against all the other background layers. Now, if you click on the drop-down menu, you've got this big range of options. This one here called Combine Matte is a particularly good choice. If we click on it, you'll see why. It gives you a black and white representation of your key, and this makes it much easier to see areas that aren't keying properly. So you can see here at the top, there's a little white smudge, and down the bottom and down here, in fact, those bits down there are a concern, and so is that bit there. These are areas that are not keying properly. Equally, you can see here on her body, which should be totally opaque, there's actually areas where the key is not solid, and that's not desirable because we don't want to have little bits of transparency on her body. That would look weird. You'd see the background behind it. So let's have a look at improving that key. Now, the area we need to get into is actually here in the screen mat. So if you open up the screen mat, you've got a series of controls for fine-tuning your key. The key ones here are clip black and clip white. So we can start with clip white, and what that will do is it'll improve the white areas. So it starts off with 100 as the maximum value. If we drag that to the left, what we're able to do is make her body more solid. So we get to about here, which is at about 90, and you can see those areas there that weren't there before. And I'll drag it back. You can see those little bits that it was going to poke through her body aren't so good, so we'll drag that down to about 90. Now the key when you're setting this is to find just at the point when it's right, and maybe 1 or 2 units more and no more. You don't want to overdrive it. Like you might think, oh, well, that's better, but it's actually not. It's going to lead to a really unpleasant looking key. So the trick is to really drag it only the amount you need, and maybe a unit or 2 for safety's sake. Now we're going to deal with the black. So the clip black will deal with these areas here. We've got just these little bits of white noise creeping in. So let's grab that and then we'll gently drag it up to the right, and you can see it start to disappear. Now the temptation would be to drag it all the way and clean up this area here, but that's dragging it too far, and you're going to push the transparency on this too much. So I'm going to reset that. The bits you're worried about are in here. So these bits here definitely need to be removed in there. So let's look at those as we increase it. And probably about there, I reckon. You know what? I'm going to go a couple more units. Yeah, I've taken it up to 8. So I can definitely see that's now got a nice full black. So as we drag through, in fact, you can play it. See, you've got a reasonable key. There is a little bit of noise here in those shadows. And that's in part because this is actually a standard definition clip. But what we can do is adjust the screen D spot. So if I grab the screen D spot and I just increase it a little bit here, I'm going to give it about half a unit. And I'm also going to do the same with my white, because this is kind of really a mix of black and white. Now what screen D spot says, when it sees little bits of noise, it just removes them off. And you can see it's kind of softened that out. Don't go too far. Like I'll show you what if you go too far, see how splodgy and nasty you get. So this is something you really want to be quite, maybe I might even pull that down to 0.4. I don't want to go over the top on this, but just a little bit of softness in green screens can often make the world of difference. So there we go. So still a little bit of noise, but it's looking a little bit better. Now, one of the other problems we've got with this green screen is that, look, we've got this fan on the right, and you've still got that area of noise that I promised you we could get rid of, and there's even a tiny bit there. So what we're going to do is we're going to do what's called a garbage mat. So a garbage mat is essentially where you draw a shape to cut out the extraneous bits on the edges, and it's super common. So to do that, select the layer that you want to apply the garbage mat to. Come up here to your tool panel and use the pen tool. With your pen tool, draw a shape around the image. Now, normally it's good to really understand your shape, but I'm going to kind of do it a bit wrong and then show you how to fix it because that's useful to know. So I'll sit here and I click points with my pen tool and I draw a shape around my image where I think it could be. Just going to make that a little bit smaller so I can get off screen. That can sometimes help when you're doing garbage map. See, I can access the bit around it. And then to here, and then I'm going to come up here. When you come up to the first point, you'll get that little 0 icon, and then you can click and join it. So you can see now I've completed my garbage man, but by the way, I'm going to make that fit again. You can see, oh, great, look, I've cut out those pictures. What I didn't do, what I should have done, is actually run the whole shot. And you'll see as I run the whole shot, oh, look, I'm starting to chop off. And then at the top, I'm chopping it off. I haven't actually built this shape the right size, but that's easy to fix. So now I'm going to use my center wheel to scroll back, which is a nice shortcut, but I could also have come down here and clicked it in here. I'm now going to grab these points and just click on them to drag them up. So if I click on this one, I can drag that up. That one there can go a little bit up. That one there can go a bit up. And this one here, actually I think that one's about right, but I definitely got a problem here. So I'm going to have to drag these down like that. And this one here is going to have to drag off. Now let's go to the beginning. And now let's go for a drag through and see, do we have any bits where it drags off screen? Looking pretty good so far. Let's just check that whisker down the bottom. I think that one can actually come across a bit. And then drag that there, and yeah, and look, I think I'm about there. I think that's pretty good. Yep, nothing getting cropped off. Cool. Observation here. When you're shooting grey screen, try not to let bits go off screen like that because it limits your ability to shift the green screen around. Like here and here, that's kind of cardinal sins. The camera operator here would have been better just being a tiny bit wider. Anyway, okay. So we've now built a garbage mat. Let's go back to the final result. And let's change that back to fit. In fact, I'm going to drag this down so I can see it even bigger because I don't have that many layers down here in my layer panel. Why don't I give myself a nice big image? There we go. So look at that. That's not looking too bad. Let's run it in real time. You should always check your keys in real time. So look, we've got lovely areas of transparency there. You don't see any green. That's one of the nice things about the spill suppressor. The Keylight has a spill suppressor built in and automatically removes that green, so you get a nice looking image. Let's deal with our background now. So I'm going to turn it back on again and come down. Now look at that. It's not even filling the screen, so let's quickly do that. So if I go to my layer drop-down menu, transform, I'm just going to fit it to comp. And there we go. So now that looks a bit better. It's filling the screen. Now, one of the things that can help is if you can kind of do things that combine your foreground and your background. And at the moment, to be honest, they do look like two planes that don't belong together. A cool trick would be to my green screen is to actually add a drop shadow. So let's reset that. Go to my effects and presets and let's type drop. And then down to perspective, there's our drop shadow. And I'm going to drag that on to my green screen. So I'm going to reset this to the default. So you can see here, look, my green screen is quite hard at the moment. You see it's there, but that's not really necessarily the sort of effect we want because what you really want to simulate is the idea that there's light on her that's also giving a shadow on the background. Makes it feel as though the background belongs to the foreground. Now, when you look at this shot, especially here where she lifts her arm, you can see there's quite a strong light over here to the right-hand side. In fact, the light on the right-hand side is the area of strongest lighting. That would be where their key light is. On the left, they've got a fill. So to make this look real, what I'll need to do is have the shadow appear more to the left. So that's one of the keys of green screen is to try and wherever you can simulate the light that's on your green screen object and drop it in other places. So let's have a look at that. So if I increase my opacity to start with, just so you can see it, and I'm going to increase my distance a little bit. Now you can see that that's actually indicating the light would be coming from there. So I'm going to take my direction, and the direction is actually the direction of where the shadow falls. Now, if I have that shadow about there, that to me feels like it's about the direction of where the light hitting this would be. Now, of course, it's much too harsh. So now let's actually look at adding a little bit more distance, but let's add some softness because it would naturally get soft. So we've got a bit of softness going there. Let's pull my opacity back because that was much too harsh. So we'll pull this back to about 50. And you can see here now we've got a much better looking shadow. And certainly if I turn this on and off, you can kind of see how that adds that feeling of she belongs to the background. Now it's still quite a dense shadow, and I think we could improve it. Now, rather than dicking around with this one, I think the best way to do this is to actually duplicate it. So if I select it and go Command D, I've now got a second drop shadow. So let's turn off the original one and let's work on this drop shadow number 2. This one, I really want to soften this out because the first one still felt a little bit harsh to me. So I'm going to increase the softness and push the distance so that it's more over to the left. So I'm darkening off the left-hand side. A little bit more softness. Let's have a bit of a play with the opacity. You can see it there. So I'll leave it about 60 for now. Let's move the distance even further off. So this one is more like the softness in the shadow that sits there on the left-hand side. Now you'll find when you turn your first shadow on, it starts to get stronger. So let's have a bit of a play with both together. Let's have a bit of a play with the distance. Can I move it even further across maybe? And I think that's probably too dense. So let's pull that back a bit. Okay. So now when I turn off my, can you see how that now really kind of looks like more like the soft shadow you would expect. So we've kind of double shadowed it with the idea being it's more denser behind her to cut her out, but then the soft shadow rule more accurately simulates a light source. If you turn them both off, that's without, and then let's turn them back on. And it does now really start to look like there's a light source over the right here pointing back. So let's have a look at it in real time, because you should always look at green screens in real time, looking for any artifacts that have crept in. And look at that transparency. That's pretty good. The shot itself, it probably is slightly soft. It's not even full HD, and there's not much we can do about that, but certainly is a key with the transparency. That's pretty nice. Now, the one last thing I would suggest with this, it's interesting to see it against a red background, but sometimes green screens can work better if you have a background that harmonizes a bit more, and red's a long way from blue. So here's an approach. I'm going to go to my curtain and I'm going to recolor it. So let's key that off. We're going to use a hue saturation setting. I'm going to drag that across onto my background. And then using the hue saturation, which is up here in my effects control, if I grab that hue, I can actually drag it about and recolor it. Now, I'm actually thinking it would be quite nice if we kind of had sort of a purpley edge to it, which is a similar color, and you'll find that it kind of has this feeling as though it's not the same as the blue, but it kind of feels like it belongs a bit with the blue. So let's have another look at that. Yeah, I quite like that. Now this is an aesthetic thing. You could pick what you want. There we go. Maybe a last little touch. I think her skin tone is a tiny bit down. So let's go back to the green screen. I'm just going to close up those drop shadows so I don't have to look at them. We do actually have a simple color corrector built into the Keylight. So if I twirl open the foreground color correction, I can enable it. Then I've got saturation, contrast, and brightness. I'm just going to get my saturation and just edge it up a bit. So there we go, at about 110. So you can see now I've just added a bit more saturation to the skin tone and it feels a bit better. Okay, and we're done. So that's how to do a green screen with some transparency in After Effects. Thanks for watching.